He drained our account and texted me, "I'm leaving you. Good luck surviving." I was at my desk when it happened, Thursday afternoon, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the office moving around me like a machine on autopilot. My screen was open to a spreadsheet I hadn't really been reading. My coffee sat untouched, already cold, not because I was emotional, but because my focus had been drifting all morning. Then my phone vibrated. Once. No warning, no buildup, just impact. I glanced down, expecting something routine, a reminder, a complaint, another passive-aggressive comment about money. Instead, I read the message. "I just emptied our account. I'm leaving you for someone who actually has ambition. Good luck surviving without me." My jaw tightened. There was no dramatic reaction, no shaking hands, no collapse, just a sharp internal recalibration, like something heavy snapping into place behind my ribs. 6 years together, 3 years married, and this was how he chose to leave. A text, an insult, and what he believed was financial annihilation. I didn't move right away. I stayed exactly where I was, shoulders squared, eyes fixed on the phone. Around me, keyboards clicked. Someone laughed down the hall. Life continued, unaware that my marriage had just detonated in silence. I opened the banking app. 80,000, zeroed out. My pulse finally picked up. Not panic, not fear, but assessment, calculation. I felt it in my neck, steady and deliberate, because something about the number didn't land the way it was supposed to. It triggered memory instead. Conversations I'd brushed off. Details I'd ignored because I trusted him. The way he insisted on handling finances. The confidence with which he'd dismiss my questions. My thumb hovered over the screen for a moment longer. Then I typed a single response. "You too." I locked my phone and set it face down on the desk. No tears, no phone calls, no scrambling. Just a quiet certainty settling in. He thought he'd just left me with nothing. What he didn't know, what he never bothered to understand, was that he'd just made the most expensive mistake of his life. Looking back, the signs were there long before the text message detonated everything. They weren't loud. They didn't arrive as screaming fights or obvious betrayals. They came quietly, disguised as confidence, wrapped in jokes, delivered with a smile that made confrontation feel unnecessary, almost unreasonable. That's how it started. Small comments at first. He'd glance at a receipt and say things like, "You really should let me handle this stuff. You overthink money." Or when I questioned a charge, he'd respond with a half smile, half sigh. "Trust me, this is basic finance." It wasn't cruel, not overtly, but it was consistent. And consistency has a way of reshaping the ground beneath your feet if you're not paying attention. The imbalance crept in slowly. He talked about ambition constantly, his, not mine, about how he was destined for something bigger, about how his consulting business was almost there, just waiting on the right break. Meanwhile, my job, the one paying steady money every month, became something he framed as temporary, safe, small, necessary but unimpressive. I noticed how often we turned into I when he talked about finances. I pay the bills. I manage the accounts. I know how this works. When I pushed back, even gently, he deflected. "You don't need to stress about this," he'd say. "I've got it covered." And for a while, that sounded reassuring. But reassurance can turn into control when questions aren't welcome. There were moments, quiet ones, where something felt off, like when he discouraged me from logging into the account directly, or when statements came less frequently, or when he brushed off my curiosity with jokes about me being financially illiterate. I didn't argue. Not because I agreed, but because I was choosing my battles. Because relationships aren't supposed to feel like negotiations over every decision. Because I believe trust was built by letting go sometimes. What I didn't realize was that he was testing boundaries. Each time I backed down, he pushed a little further. More authority, more dismissal, less transparency. The shift wasn't just financial. Emotionally, he grew impatient, restless. He started traveling more. Conferences, networking events, vague meetings that always seemed important but never produced results. When I asked how they went, his answers were polished but empty. Good connections, big potential, people who get it, people who weren't me. 8 months ago, after learning the truth about the account, I watched him differently. I listened more carefully. Not suspiciously, analytically. I noticed how he spoke about money like it was power, not responsibility. How he framed success as something he deserved, not something earned. I said nothing. Instead, I prepared. I kept my routine, paid my share, acted normal. I didn't want a confrontation. I wanted clarity. I wanted to understand how far he'd go if he thought he was untouchable. The answer came sooner than I expected. In the weeks leading up to the text, the contempt sharpened. He criticized my work ethic, compared me to people he met out there, talked about starting fresh, reinventing himself, leveling up. I could feel it then. The relationship wasn't ending because we'd grown apart. It was ending because he believed he'd outgrown me and thought he could take everything with him on the way out. He thought I'd be blindsided. He thought I wouldn't understand what he'd done. He thought wrong. The first call came exactly 73 minutes after his text. I remember because I'd checked the time, not out of panic, but precision. I'd finished my workday, shut down my computer, and walked out of the building like any other Thursday. No breakdown, no frantic pacing, just routine, controlled movements, my mind already shifting from shock to assessment. My phone started vibrating as I reached the parking lot. His name lit up the screen. I declined the call. It rang again. Declined. Then an unknown number. Declined. By the time I sat in my car, messages were stacking up fast. What did you do? The bank says I owe them money. This is your debt too. Answer your phone. I rested my hands on the steering wheel and let the screen light up again and again. None of this urgency belonged to me anymore. 20 minutes later, his sister called. I'd always liked her. She was the only one in his family who didn't speak in entitlement or assumptions. So I answered. What's going on? She asked immediately. He's panicking. The bank keeps calling about a massive debt. I kept my voice steady. He drained what he thought was our joint account and left me. There was a pause. What do you mean thought? It wasn't a joint account, I said. It was a business line of credit. In his name. I was just an authorized user. Silence stretched on the line. So, he took money from a credit line? Yes, I said. And now he owes the bank $80,000, plus interest. But you put money into it too. Those were payments, I replied. Not ownership. The debt was always his. Another pause. You knew? I found out 8 months ago. Then why didn't you stop him? I didn't think he'd do something this reckless. She exhaled slowly. He's been seeing another woman, she said. For months. Someone he met at a conference. Crypto industry, I think. That didn't surprise me. I figured, I said. You should help him, she continued carefully. This debt, he's spiraling. I let out a short, humorless breath. Why would I do that? Because it's the right thing to do. The right thing, I repeated. He thought he was leaving me with nothing. He assumed I'd be broke and desperate. The only reason he's in trouble is because he didn't understand his own financial setup. She didn't argue. I ended the call. By the next morning, the situation had escalated. His parents started calling. His father even showed up at my apartment building, demanding a conversation, shouting from the lobby about responsibility and doing the honorable thing. The doorman called up to ask if I wanted to see him. I said no. Security escorted him out while I stayed upstairs, untouched by the performance. Later that day, his sister reached out again, this time with details. Apparently, he'd told the woman he was seeing that he was about to walk away from the marriage with a huge payout. $80,000 in cash. Alimony. Half my retirement. He'd painted himself as a man about to be financially free, married to someone who would fund his new life. The illusion didn't last long. When he admitted the debt, the woman disappeared, ghosted him within 24 hours. He'd already signed a lease on an apartment they were supposed to share, except her name was the only one on it. The landlord wouldn't let him move in. Now he was single, deeply in debt, and without a place to stay. Did I feel bad? For about 3 seconds. Then I remembered the text. Good luck surviving. That night, I sat at my kitchen counter with a bowl of cereal, my phone vibrating endlessly beside me. Calls, messages, voicemails I didn't listen to. He thought draining the account was his exit strategy. Instead, it was the moment everything he'd hidden collapsed in on itself. And this was only the beginning. The silence afterward was louder than the chaos that came before it. Once I blocked his number, my phone finally stopped vibrating, but the quiet that followed wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, dense, like the air before a storm finishes breaking. I sat alone in the apartment that night, lights low, listening to sounds I'd never noticed before. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint traffic outside, the click of the thermostat cycling on and off. This was the part people imagine as emotional collapse. It wasn't. I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I didn't replay memories, looking for the moment everything went wrong. That kind of reaction belongs to shock. I was past that. What I felt instead was clarity. Clean, sharp, uncomfortable. I replayed his text in my head, not the words, but the intention behind them. He hadn't just left. He'd wanted to cripple me. He'd imagined me discovering the empty account, panicking, calling him in tears, begging for answers. He'd expected power. And when that power didn't materialize, panic had rushed in to fill the gap. That wasn't my problem. The next morning, I didn't take a day off. I woke up at my usual time, showered, dressed, and went to work. Not because I was pretending everything was fine, but because routine is grounding when emotions threaten to pull you in directions that don't help. At my desk, I opened a fresh document. I started documenting everything. Dates, times, screenshots, bank statements, his text messages, the withdrawal confirmation, the call logs showing how many times he'd tried to reach me after realizing what he'd done. I wasn't acting out of anger. I was acting out of self-preservation. By noon, I'd already contacted a lawyer, not to retaliate, to protect myself. The consultation was short and factual. I explained the account structure, my role as an authorized user, the timeline. The lawyer didn't react emotionally. That alone told me everything I needed to know. "You're not liable," she said, "and his actions don't help his position." That night, the emotional manipulation began. Messages from his family filtered in through new numbers, carefully worded, sympathetic in tone, accusatory in substance. "He's not himself right now. You know he didn't mean it this way. Marriage is about working through mistakes." Mistakes. That word stuck with me. Draining an account. Leaving your spouse via text. Trying to frame it as ambition. Those weren't mistakes. They were decisions. I didn't respond. A few days later, his sister called again. Her voice was different this time, less defensive, more tired. "He's staying on our parents' couch," she said. "He keeps saying you set him up." "I didn't," I replied calmly. "He set himself up." She didn't disagree. "He thought you'd panic," she admitted, "that you wouldn't understand the account." "That's on him." After I hung up, I sat back and stared at the wall for a long moment, not because I was overwhelmed, but because something inside me was shifting. For years, I'd been accommodating, patient, reasonable. I'd mistaken restraint for compromise and trust for silence. I'd let his confidence fill space I should have occupied myself. That part of me was done. The betrayal didn't harden me, it clarified me. I wasn't interested in revenge. I wasn't interested in teaching lessons. I wanted distance, boundaries, finality. When the divorce papers were filed, quickly, efficiently, I felt no satisfaction. Just inevitability, like closing a door that had already been open too long. He kept trying to reach me. Through friends, through family, through numbers I didn't recognize. Each attempt reinforced the same truth. He didn't miss me. He missed control. And for the first time since the marriage began, I felt something close to steady footing beneath me. Not relief. Resolve. The moment the divorce paperwork was officially filed, everything shifted. Up until then, his panic had been private, contained within frantic calls, desperate messages, and late-night spirals shared with his family. Once the legal process started, the situation stopped being emotional and became adversarial. That was when entitlement took over completely. The first move came through a lawyer. Not a good one. A cheaply formatted letter arrived at my apartment a week later, demanding I take responsibility for half the debt. The argument was sloppy, built on assumptions rather than facts. It claimed the account was marital in nature and that I had benefited equally from the funds. My lawyer read it once and smiled. "He's reaching," she said, "and he knows it." Her response was a single page. Clear, clinical, unemotional. I was an authorized user, not a co-signer. The account predated the marriage. The debt was his alone. End of discussion. That shut the legal door, but it opened another. The emotional pressure campaign began immediately. His parents escalated. Calls turned into unannounced appearances. His father showed up again at my building, louder this time, insisting I was destroying his son's life. The doorman called to ask if I wanted to come down. I didn't. Security removed him. Again. His mother tried a different angle. She left voicemails, long, breathless messages about forgiveness, compassion, and how men make mistakes when they feel cornered. She framed his actions as fear, not malice. I deleted them without responding. Then the narrative changed. Online. One morning, I opened social media to find vague posts about betrayal, about financial abuse, about being trapped by someone who manipulated systems to control her. He didn't name me, but he didn't have to. Mutual friends connected the dots easily. The problem for him was credibility. Several of our shared acquaintances worked in finance. One of his former coworkers from the bank commented directly under one post, "You opened that account yourself. You used to brag about the rewards points." The post disappeared within the hour. Screenshots didn't. That was when desperation kicked in. He tried to weaponize my job. Calls started coming in daily. Anonymous tips claiming I was a dangerous, unethical, a financial predator. HR called me in for a meeting, careful but firm. I came prepared. I brought documentation, texts, statements, the withdrawal confirmation, the threatening messages. I also played them a voicemail. His voice, clear, controlled, angry. "I'm going to call your job every day until you pay my debt. I'll make up whatever I need to. They'll fire you eventually." The room went quiet. Legal got involved. A cease and desist was issued. He violated it within 48 hours. That was the moment consequences stopped being theoretical. My employer pressed charges for harassment. Around the same time, the bank began collection proceedings. He'd missed the first payment, burned through most of the money already. According to his sister, the spending spree was impressive in its recklessness. First-class flights for him and the woman he'd been seeing. Designer shopping. A luxury apartment deposit he couldn't actually afford. A new car down payment that didn't clear. Cosmetic procedures he'd always wanted. And a significant chunk funneled into her crypto venture. When the bank asked for proof of income, he had none. He'd quit his job 2 weeks earlier, assuming he wouldn't need one after winning the separation. The bank didn't negotiate. They accelerated the debt, full balance, plus interest, due immediately. He tried to get his father to co-sign a consolidation loan. Refused. His mother said no. Even his sister declined. That's when he crossed into something else entirely. He launched a crowdfunding campaign. The title framed him as a survivor of financial exploitation. The description was fiction, carefully written, emotionally manipulative, entirely false. Photos of him looking distressed. Claims of manipulation. A goal of $100,000 to rebuild. It raised $37 in 3 days. One donor left a comment, LOL. His family group chat exploded. He accused them of not supporting him, of choosing me over blood. His aunt responded publicly. "Everyone knows what you did. Stop embarrassing yourself." I watched all of this from a distance. I didn't intervene. I didn't comment. I didn't correct the story. Reality was doing that for me. By the time the harassment charges resulted in an arrest, the escalation had reached a point even I hadn't predicted. He spent the night in jail. His father bailed him out, once. When he violated the no-contact conditions a second time, creating fake emails to target my employer again, the trail led straight back to his IP address. This time, his father let him sit for 48 hours. The divorce proceedings continued in parallel. Every attempt he made to regain control stripped him of a little more credibility, a little more support, a little more leverage. The pressure he'd tried to apply to me had turned inward, and he was cracking under the weight of it. The dark moment didn't arrive with noise. There was no dramatic confrontation, no shouting match, no single instant where everything shattered at once. It came quietly in the aftermath, when the chaos paused just long enough for the weight of it all to settle. It was late evening when it finally hit me. I was alone in the apartment, sitting at the small kitchen table, paperwork spread neatly in front of me, bank statements, legal filings, printed screenshots, everything organized, labeled, controlled. On the surface, I looked like someone who had things handled. Inside, the cost finally registered. Not fear, not grief, something heavier. Exhaustion. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling, jaw clenched, breath slow and deliberate. My body was tense in a way I hadn't allowed myself to notice before. Shoulders locked, neck tight, muscles holding a readiness that hadn't been necessary in days. This wasn't about missing him. I didn't. What hit me was the realization of how much space I'd given away over the years, how often I'd stepped aside to keep peace, how easily I'd accepted being minimized because it was quieter than arguing. I hadn't been weak, but I had been accommodating in ways that slowly eroded my own authority in the relationship. That realization landed hard. I replayed moments I'd dismissed at the time, the jokes about my intelligence, the way he'd correct me in front of people. How financial conversations always ended with me backing down. Not because I agreed, but because I was tired of being talked over. I'd trusted someone who didn't respect me. That wasn't betrayal in hindsight. That was a pattern I'd ignored. My phone buzzed once on the table. Unknown number. I didn't answer. A voicemail followed. I listened to it without reacting, elbow resting on the table, fingers curled loosely together. His voice was lower than usual, not angry, not demanding. Defeated. He said my name once, just once, then talked about pressure, about things getting out of control, about how he never meant for it to go this far. There was no apology, just explanation. Justification dressed up as regret. I deleted the voicemail and powered my phone off. That was the moment I understood something clearly. If I engaged now, if I softened, if I responded, if I tried to salvage dignity for him, this would never end. He would always find a way to frame himself as misunderstood, unlucky, wronged by circumstances, rather than accountable for his choices. The dark moment wasn't despair. It was acceptance. Acceptance that the person I'd built a life with didn't exist anymore, or maybe never had. Acceptance that closure wouldn't come from conversation. Acceptance that walking away cleanly would require enduring discomfort without seeking validation. I stood up and began packing. Not everything, just essentials. Documents, clothes I actually wore, items that belonged to me before the marriage. I worked methodically, without rushing, without hesitation. Each drawer emptied felt less like loss and more like reclaiming space. At one point, I paused with a framed photo in my hands. A vacation from years ago. We looked happy, or at least we looked aligned. I didn't linger. I set it face down in the box and closed the lid. That night, I slept for the first time without checking my phone, without bracing for impact, without anticipating the next escalation. My dreams weren't peaceful, but they were uninterrupted. In the morning, I woke with a different kind of clarity. The worst had already happened. He'd tried to destroy me and failed. What remained wasn't damage control. It was direction. The turning point wasn't dramatic. There was no courtroom explosion, no speech, no moment where everyone suddenly understood the truth at once. What shifted things wasn't volume, it was exposure. Quiet, unavoidable exposure. It happened at the first divorce hearing. I arrived early, dressed plainly, carrying a single folder. No performance, no statements prepared for an audience. I sat straight-backed in the chair, hands resting calmly in my lap, eyes forward. This wasn't about winning. It was about ending something cleanly. He arrived late. Designer clothes, new haircut, the posture of someone trying to project control while already drowning. He didn't look at me when he sat down. He didn't need to. I could feel the tension rolling off him. Tight, brittle, unsustainable. When the judge reviewed the financial records, the atmosphere in the room changed. Slowly, methodically. Statements were read. Timelines established. The $80,000 withdrawal flagged. The text messages entered into record. His resignation from work noted. The crowdfunding attempt mentioned. The harassment charges acknowledged. Then he spoke. He claimed I'd tricked him. Said I knew the account was a credit line and didn't warn him. Framed my silence as manipulation. Painted himself as the victim of superior knowledge. The judge listened without interruption, then asked a single question. Did you force him to open the account? No. Did you force him to withdraw the money? No. Did you manage the account? Yes. Did you work in banking? Yes. The judge didn't raise her voice. She didn't scold. She didn't lecture. She stated facts. You set up the account. You managed it for years. Ignorance of your own financial instruments is not your spouse's responsibility. No alimony. No sympathy. He actually owed me money for draining funds that included my monthly contributions. The judge factored the withdrawal into asset division. What would have been equal distribution wasn't. For the first time since this started, I saw it register on his face. Not anger. Fear. After the hearing, something shifted socially too. People stopped asking me how I was holding up. They stopped offering advice. The story was no longer ambiguous. The narrative he'd tried to build collapsed under documentation and consistency. Even his family went quiet. His sister texted me later that night. "I'm sorry," she wrote. "He really thought he could talk his way out of this." I didn't reply. That same week, the bank escalated collections. Interest compounded. Missed payments triggered penalties. The number grew faster than he could deny it. And something else happened, something internal. I stopped bracing. I didn't check my phone compulsively anymore. I didn't anticipate retaliation. I didn't rehearse explanations in my head. The truth was no longer fragile. It didn't need defending. I reclaimed space. I redirected my paycheck to my own account. I finalized a new lease. I updated beneficiaries. I closed loops I hadn't even realized were open. Power, I learned, isn't loud. It's procedural. It's knowing where you stand and refusing to be dragged backward into chaos just because someone else can't accept consequence. He tried once more, through a mutual friend, to test the door. Asked if we could talk, said he'd learned his lesson, said the woman meant nothing, said the pressure made him act out. I declined, not with anger, not with explanation, with finality. The turning point wasn't me taking control from him. It was realizing I'd never lost it. Once the court made its ruling, the collapse became irreversible. Up until that point, there had still been illusions, thin, desperate ones, that he might recover, spin a new version of events, convince someone somewhere that this wasn't his fault. The ruling stripped those illusions away. What followed wasn't dramatic retaliation, it was gravity. The financial consequences landed first. The bank moved his debt into full collections. Missed payments, penalties, compounded interest. The balance climbed fast, crossing into a number he couldn't outrun with excuses or delay. His credit score cratered. Cards were frozen. Applications rejected. Every system he'd once treated as a tool turned into a wall. He tried bankruptcy. Briefly, it didn't work. During the filing process, investigators flagged transfers he'd made to his parents in the weeks leading up to it, attempts to hide assets before declaring insolvency. The trustee found them immediately. That kind of behavior doesn't get overlooked. Bankruptcy fraud is a federal crime. He panicked and withdrew the petition before it could move forward. But the damage was done. An investigation lingered. The pressure followed him. Meanwhile, the harassment charges moved ahead. 18 months of probation. Mandatory anger management, a criminal record. That record did more damage than any judge ever could. Job offers dried up. Background checks failed. Interviews ended early. The consulting persona he'd built, confident, polished, promising, meant nothing once accountability showed up. He ended up working retail. It lasted 6 weeks. According to his sister, he berated a customer who looked at him wrong and was escorted out by security. After that, he landed a job at a call center, ironically, in collections, reading scripts, asking strangers for money he knew they didn't have. Reality has a sense of humor like that. His parents stopped shielding him. They made him pay rent, contribute, follow rules. When he complained, they reminded him that consequences weren't punishments, they were outcomes. That lasted until he tried to steal checks from his father's desk. That was the last straw. He was told to leave. He moved in with a cousin who charged market rate rent and demanded first and last month up front. No exceptions, no sympathy, no family discount. Socially, he isolated fast. Friends distanced themselves. Invitations stopped. Group chats went quiet. The story had spread, and not in the version he preferred. People didn't argue with him anymore. They disengaged. Even the woman he'd left me for disappeared entirely. The crypto venture collapsed. The investment he'd poured into it evaporated. $15,000 reduced to a few hundred in a failed digital coin. When regulators started asking questions, she vanished from his life like she'd never been there at all. I heard all of this secondhand. I didn't ask for updates. But news has a way of traveling when you don't need it anymore. The divorce finalized without ceremony. Asset division reflected the withdrawal. I kept my retirement. My home, mine before the marriage, remained mine. My legal fees were reimbursed. The judge cited malicious behavior and ruled accordingly. The total he owed, between the bank, penalties, and legal costs, hovered around $95,000, and he had no realistic path to escape it. He reached out once more through a mutual acquaintance, asked if we could start over, said he'd learned his lesson, said everything that mattered too late. My response was short. Tell him I said good luck surviving. The message got back to him. According to the acquaintance, he lost control, shouting about how I'd ruined his life, how I'd planned this, how he'd been set up. None of it changed reality. I wasn't present for his unraveling. I didn't witness it firsthand, but I didn't need to. The fallout wasn't about him losing everything. It was about him discovering that entitlement doesn't protect you when systems, facts, and consequences are aligned. And once they are, there's no arguing your way out. Life didn't snap back into place after everything ended. It settled, slowly, quietly, in ways that didn't announce themselves. In the months after the divorce finalized, my days became simpler, not emptier, just cleaner. My money went where I decided. My time followed my own rhythm. There were no explanations to rehearse, no tension waiting at home, no calculations about how much space I was allowed to take up in my own life. That was the real victory. Not watching him fall, not seeing consequences play out, but realizing how much lighter everything felt once I stopped carrying someone else's entitlement. I didn't walk away bitter, I walked away informed. I learned that trust without transparency is just vulnerability waiting to be exploited. That confidence without accountability is usually just arrogance in disguise. And that people who belittle you quietly often panic loudly when they lose control. I also learned something harder to admit. I had ignored my instincts, not because they were wrong, but because acknowledging them would have required discomfort. Boundaries. Conflict. The kind of conversations that risked changing the relationship. Avoiding that discomfort didn't preserve the marriage. It delayed the inevitable. Today I'm doing fine. I kept my job, my home, my savings, my peace. I started dating again, not out of loneliness, but curiosity. I choose differently now. I listen when something feels off. I ask questions. I don't surrender authority in the name of harmony. As for him, last I heard, he's still paying for the choices he made in a single afternoon. Monthly payments stretching years into the future. A reputation that won't reset just because he wants it to. A story he keeps telling himself about betrayal, conspiracy, and bad luck. But reality doesn't negotiate. Here's the lesson I took from all of this. If someone drains what they think is a joint account and tells you good luck surviving, make sure you understand exactly what kind of account it is. And more importantly, make sure you understand who you're really married to. Because sometimes karma doesn't need your help. Sometimes people destroy themselves all on their own. And when they do, the strongest thing you can choose is to step aside, let it happen, and keep walking forward without looking back. I'll see you in the next video. And in the meantime, take care of yourself.